Well, it's neighborhood church weekend again, and so I'm sitting here at a table right here.
At my table.
I know.
Welcome to my home.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
This is so cool to sit here and chat with you about this, the way that Jesus used the table and the invites to the table, grabbing people from everywhere to say, let me show you what this new kingdom looks like. Let me show you what this gospel that I'm preaching, what it looks like.
Yeah.
First question for you.
Yeah.
If you could share a meal with any one of the people that Jesus invited that day in this story in Luke, which one would you want to have at your table?
Am I having the sorry, this is such like
this is a hypothetical.
Type A of me. Am I having the conversation like with everyone in that time, or is it like post like? Today, I'm having the conversation today. Okay, I want it to be with Levi because I feel like he got to experience so much with Jesus and being a part of his ministry so up close that I had like so many questions. He wrote it as on gospel. I'm like, ooh, I'd love to.
You'll have Google on the table here to translate from the old Aramaic or whatever.
I'm not brushed up on my Hebrew.
So you talked a lot about how meals were, you called it acts of grace. Mm-hmm. I love that. For someone who's kind of nervous about initiating that kind of connection, especially across differences, we're kind of siloed in our communities. We're kind of in our own little bubbles. What's a small step someone could take this week?
Yeah. I mean, I think thinking through I think sometimes we hear something that feels intimidating and we think if it's not that, then we don't do it. And so I think break it down, right, into smaller steps. So if inviting someone to your home feels overwhelming because you don't have your own home, you share it with roommates, or, your home's a wreck, or, your kid's wild, like all of my children, and those would be like overwhelming things to get to. Maybe it's you're picking a neutral site, instead of inviting, this coworker over to my house, that feels like too personal too soon. Maybe it's just like, hey, can we have lunch together in the break room, right? And it can be a simple start, but the point is the intentionality of it. Yeah. And I think just because life is so busy and so chaotic, and for me at least, it doesn't happen unless it's planned,
Yep.
And so actually thinking through, okay, who do I feel like the Lord's putting on my heart and why? What, and having a conversation with God about that and making the ask and then seeing where it goes.
But plan it. Put it on the calendar. Make it happen. And I love that. I think that's a really good start. There's a line in your message that really stuck with me. Mm-hmm. You said Jesus didn't just say you're forgiven. He sat with people while they were still messy. Mm-hmm. How do we learn to sit with others and maybe even with ourselves in the messy? Mm-hmm. How have you learned that over the time sharing the table with people?
I think it requires a willingness to step out of our comfort zone, which I talk a little bit about, right? Mm-hmm. Like we all have different things that make us feel more settled or at home. And so we typically try to structure our lives around that, right? Like I don't often go out of my way to be stressed and anxious and a mess. No, I'm trying to do things the opposite, to calm me, to settle me. But messiness, right? Like people that are walking through hurt or pain or difficulties or challenges, addiction, right? Whatever their thing is, it's complicated and it requires something of us. It requires sacrifice. It requires, a reordering of priorities. It requires saying no to this because I'm making space for that. And so I think you won't see the shift unless you start to be okay with embracing the uncomfortable or embracing something that's different than maybe what you would prefer to experience, which can be challenging. The other thing that's super helpful that has been something I've had to learn the hard way is being okay not solving their mess, their things, right? Because it's easy for me to have a friend or a family member or gosh, my poor sister. I feel like I did this all the time growing up where I'm like, all right, your life's a mess. Let me tell you how to fix it. And just as I've gotten older, I've learned how unhelpful that can be.
It's so the opposite of winsome, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, because no one wants a Becky know-it-all. But if I can just be present and I can show up again and not try to solve it, but just be a listening ear, be helpful in the ways I can, but not try to control the situation or control you, it's a lot more compelling. So
I think I would agree. So you challenge us to make one of our 21 meals, kind of intentional. What would that look like for you in this season? With little kids, with, already, who's someone maybe that you're praying about inviting to your table?
Yeah, for me, it has to, unless it's during work hours where it's like, yeah, let's go grab coffee together, which typically ends up being people in the congregation, it typically involves my family, and so it involves coming into the chaos of what dinner with a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an almost 4-year-old look like, right? Which is chaos.
Yes.
And so, yeah, for me and Garrett, like the people we feel very prodded from God to like be pursuing intentional connections with are people on our actual street, our actual court. I've been telling Garrett, okay, let's do a block party. And I finally said it to one of my neighbors to where now I'm accountable to like, I have to do that. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay, gosh, now it's not just Garrett.
This is the summer.
But it's happening. And so, but then also as my boys have gotten more involved in year-round sports, right, that adds a layer of busyness for our family, but it also creates an opportunity that I didn't have before when, and so there's families at my boys' schools that I was homeschooled growing up. I didn't have these like natural networks
we all know,
in
Becky.
The community. I know, right? Tell me you're homeschooled without telling you're homeschooled, Becky. Like I didn't have as many natural networks in my community outside of church and youth group. And so I'm really loving this stage of life where whether it's families on my boys' soccer teams or, other moms at school, like having these interactions. And even though I get awkward or I feel uncomfortable but just saying, okay, take a deep breath, just be present in these, be intentional in these. And I'm not trying to be like, and for me, it's hard because of my job. Because the minute they find out I'm a pastor, they're either like, so what do you do all day? Or they're like, oh, let me talk to some other mom. And so I feel that uncomfortableness. But just instead of avoiding it, leaning in and saying, yeah. One of the things that happens a lot at my boys' school is, especially if it's someone who like has kind of experienced Cornerstone before, is they apologize. Oh, we used to go, but I'm so sorry we haven't been. We really should. And I'm like, that's not why I'm trying to pursue a relationship with you. And so it's just taking deep breaths and being okay and trying to be intentional and letting God move.
Yeah.
And lead conversations and me just being present for how he leads that and not trying to force or coerce a certain conversation to happen in this timing. It's more just openness and willingness to be intentional than like actually having a plan of like, okay, we're going to talk about this topic and then that thing. And so
just be present.
I mean, as I said in the sermon, it'll be difficult and messy and challenging and growing, but what it won't be is complicated. It's just kind of easy.
Just do this.
Because that's what we're designed for, right? We're designed to be in community and fellowship with one another around a table. There's a reason, and not that there has to be a table, right? But there's just the table brings a different type of attentiveness, when I'm sitting across the table to you, as opposed to when we're side by side or across the room. And so bringing that type of intention and attentiveness to the interactions you're having.
And you have a really nice
with the people
table
in your life.
So thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I love this. And let me throw a challenge out to you. Let me actually repeat what Becky's invitation, to take one of your 21 meals that you'll have this week, and just one, and make that an act of grace. Invite someone in, not to fix them, not to convert them, but just to see them, to listen, to make room at your table the way that Jesus made room at his table. It could be a neighbor, a coworker, someone perhaps that you've drifted from, or someone who simply needs to know that they're not alone. It could even just mean being fully present with your own family, like Becky said, putting the phone down, listening to what's underneath the surface. And now imagine what might happen if we all did that, church, just once this week. Imagine the stories shared, the walls, I think, that might come down, the belonging that would begin to grow. Ever imagine what our communities would feel like if tables became sacred again? If love showed up in kitchens, in coffee shops, like Becky suggested, and not just in our auditoriums. Because when Jesus said, follow me, Levi threw a party. He opened his door. He made space. And what might happen if we did the same? Let me also put a question here on screen that you can use to go a little bit further in exploring all these truths. We'll leave it up for a few minutes. So perhaps you can turn to someone and attempt to answer it. Here's the question. Who needs to be invited to your table? And what's been holding you back? Hey, I hope to see you soon.